were able, we're going to read some of those verses again from the 4th chapter of John. John chapter 4, and we'll begin at verse 4. We'll skip around a little bit. John chapter 4, verse 4. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." We'll skip down to verse 15. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know, we worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back into the town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. Skipping down to verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." Let us pray. God, we thank you for this moment. We thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for your people. We thank you for your word. God, we ask that you move in this place. Move within us. Move in this world, God. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. When I was growing up, my pastor told us that read a lot from the Bible. If you read a lot of scripture, then you don't have to preach long. I can't make any guarantees, but Acts of Activism is a book written by Madison. In it, she tells the story of activists in Sub-Saharan Africa who use performance as a means of resistance. From everyday performances of local activism to staged enactments performed before theater audiences, Madison attempts to capture the dynamic relationship between performance and activism as she chronicles their day-to-day struggle for human rights. In the introduction, she explores the idea that the distance between what is, the current state of affairs, and what ought to be, suggesting that in that distance, in that space, there means that there is work yet to be done. She summed up this feeling regarding bridging the gap, what is and what ought to be, by asking a simple question: what should I do with what I have witnessed? And if I may use my sanctified imagination this morning, I can hear the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well asking the same question after a chance encounter with Jesus. What should I do with what I have witnessed? Before we can answer the question, what should I do with what I have witnessed, I want to explore the idea of witness as it appears in various places in the Bible. In the Old Testament, witness is sometimes used to describe inanimate objects, such as the heap of stones testifying to the covenant between Jacob and Laban in the 37th chapter of Genesis, or the stone that Joshua set up in the 24th chapter of the book that bears his name, as a reminder of the Israelites' covenant of relationship with God. More often, however, witness was used in legal matters. Witnesses were required to attest to important legal agreements, especially in the case of marriage contracts or the purchase of property. Of course, in the Ten Commandments, the instruction was given against bearing false witness. Mosaic law deemed it absolutely necessary to have witnesses, at least two, in all cases argued before a judge, especially criminal cases. And anyone who refused to be a witness when he had a testimony to bear was considered to have sinned. I put emphasis on he because it's important to note that according to the historian Josephus, there were some specific people who could not be witnesses in legal matters, including those who were not of age, slaves, and women. In the New Testament, this meaning becomes specified. Witnesses were still attesting to what they had seen or what they had experienced, but we specifically see them attesting to encounters with Jesus. In this text, the 4th chapter of John, the Samaritan woman is our witness. She encounters Jesus and audaciously tells others about her experience. Though it's not the case in this text, sometimes because of their articulation of their experiences, witnesses are caused to suffer even unto death, like Stephen in Acts 22. This meaning of witness is articulated by the Greek word martus that comes into English as martyr. If the answer to the question that has been posed, what should I do with what I have witnessed, builds the bridge between what is and what ought to be, then I believe what is the current state of affairs, the context in which the story is situated, is the first thing we need to examine as we look at this text. What is? In the 2nd and 3rd chapters of John, we find Jesus' activity centering people and places and events that are important to Judaism. In chapter 2, we find Jesus in the temple during Passover. In chapter 3, he has a conversation with Nicodemus, the Pharisee. But in this 4th chapter, Jesus moves away from all of that when he comes to Samaria. This encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well very clearly illustrates that contrast. Whereas Nicodemus is named and noted as a respected member of the Jewish establishment, she is an unnamed woman who is a member of a foreign group perceived to be the enemy. Now, why did the Samaritans and the Jews have beef? Well, this is narrated first in 2 Kings and appears throughout the Old Testament in books like Ezra and Nehemiah. The simplified version is that the Samaritans were people who came about when certain Israelites stayed behind after the Assyrian captivity of the northern kingdom of Israel. They intermarried with the Assyrians and produced the Samaritans, who were ethnically and culturally and religiously a hybrid of Jews and Gentiles. Part of their beef hinged on a dispute regarding the correct location of the place of worship. The Samaritans built and worshipped at a shrine on Mount Gerizim, whereas the Jews worshipped at the temple in Jerusalem. This morning's text sort of explores that. It comes up in the conversation between Jesus and the woman. Verse 9 says, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" In addition to the ethnic and cultural state, we can also explore gender as a matter of what is. We see that here because not only was she a Samaritan, but she was a woman. So it was not only taboo for Jesus to be talking to her because of her ethnicity, but also because of their gender dynamic. Though they don't say it, the disciples are perplexed. Verse 27, just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Kimberly Crenshaw calls it intersectionality, when social categories like race and class and gender overlap and cause interwoven oppression. And we see that as we explore the what is of this encounter. Much of the commentary regarding this story focuses on what many have deemed her questionable moral character or her intellectual ability or lack thereof to engage Jesus in serious theological conversation. These conclusions are based on the intersections of her identity as a woman and a Samaritan. But I submit for your consideration that we have done this sister a grave disservice. In verse 16, Jesus tells her to go, call her husband, and come back. She replies that she has no husband, after which Jesus responds that she's right because she's had 5. What I had always heard was that she had apparently been married and divorced, and 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 then now she was shacking up. But what if she was bound by the custom of Levirate marriage, just like Tamar in Genesis 38? What if, according to that custom, she was obligated to marry her deceased husband's brother to produce an heir and preserve any inheritance that we pass down? But again, call on my sanctified imagination, what if she or the men in the family to which she was connected was experiencing fertility issues and producing an heir for this family's inheritance? The reality is we do not know. And another reality is the way that we choose to characterize her speaks more to our own capacity for prejudice than it ever will about the truth regarding her marital and sexual history. I'm going to say that one more time. Another reality is the way that we choose to characterize her in this text speaks more to our own capacity for prejudice than it ever will about the truth regarding her marital and sexual history. But another reality is this was not the aspect of their interaction that Jesus chose to make the focal point. Perhaps it was a way of illustrating that Jesus knows all things, something that comes up repeatedly in John's gospel. Or perhaps it was a way of her illustrating her ability to see him with new eyes. Because in fact, his knowledge about the intimate details of her life caused her to have a revelation that he must be a prophet. And that revelation prompted her to engage him theologically regarding the dispute between the Jews and the Samaritans. Regardless to the ways she had been marginalized and the ways she has been characterized even down through time, there is no doubt that this woman is a witness, one who was changed by her encounter with Jesus and moved by her desire to have others share that experience. Jesus' journey to Samaria and consequently his conversation with the woman at the well challenged the status quo, the state of what is, and caused us to rethink what is possible, which brings us to our next point, what ought to be. Vision is the capacity to see that which is or is not yet as though it already is. Vision helps us to conceptualize what ought to be. In her work, In a Blaze of Glory, Emily Towns suggests that we should envision and hope for a future that refuses to accept or tolerate injustice and seeks to overcome the discrepancy between reality, aka what is, and expectations, aka what should be. I was drawn to this because of how closely it connected to our centering question, what should I do with what I have witnessed, that seeks to bridge the gap between what is and what ought to be. She says that to live and believe in justice means prayerfully staring down suffering with an apocalyptic vision. Now, we get scared and start looking funny when folks start talking about the apocalypse, but apocalypse in the Greek literally just means to uncover or to reveal. So this is not a gloom and doom, utter destruction type of apocalypse. No, but the task of an apocalyptic vision is to offer an alternative picture of reality and point the community in that direction. Through God's continued revelation, we become witnesses to an apocalyptic vision that shows us a different way to live in communion with God and in communion with creation. Through God's continued revelation, we become witnesses to heavenly mysteries that help us make sense of earthly realities. Through God's continued revelation, we become witnesses to God's rule of hope and justice on earth as it is in heaven. Through God's 23 and 24, prompted by the woman's theological inquiry about the true place of worship, acknowledging the realities of the dispute, Jesus tells the woman that a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth. What Jesus is illustrating is a time when all of the constructs we have created won't matter. All of the labels we apply for the purpose of othering will be null and void. All the boundaries we create for the purpose of marginalizing will be erased. All the walls we build for the purpose of dividing will be torn down. Now, I want to make something clear. As we consider our world today, I do not believe this apocalyptic vision of what ought to be can be achieved by means of avoidance. No, racism cannot be resolved by colorblindness. Poverty cannot be eradicated by pretending that the wealth gap doesn't exist. Discrimination based on age and disability and gender and sexuality cannot be overcome by ignoring or excommunicating our family and the most vulnerable among us. Xenophobia will not go away if we build a wall. As a matter of fact, the reality is the only way out is through. Through the discomfort, through the difficult conversations, through confronting our biases and privilege, through challenging misconceptions, through embracing the beauty of our differences, through building and repairing relationships. Moving through these things is the only way we can ensure that God's will is done as we pray on earth as it is in heaven. Moving through these things is the only way we can move beyond the foolishness and worship God in spirit and in truth. That's right. Moving through these things is how we begin to envision and build the world as it ought to be. Since we have navigated the difficulty of what is and considered the promise of what ought to be, our last task this morning is to simply answer the question, what should I do then with what I have witnessed? The author I spoke about initially when I stood before you, D. Sonia Madison, talks about the simple answer to this question, what should I do with what I have witnessed, being twofold responsibility. The first, acting on our ability to have a response. The second, providing others with the ability to respond in their own way. Amen. The text says in verse 28 that she left her water jar. She abandoned her original intention for going to the well and went back to the town and told the people that they needed to come check out this dude who was prophetic and maybe even the Messiah. Verse 39 says that many Samaritans believed because of her testimony, because of her witness, and they invited Jesus to stay with them, and he did, and even more people came to believe. The woman acted on her ability to respond, which is the first step. She herself felt seen and believed, and there was something special about Jesus. Yeah. So she engaged Jesus, and thus she was changed. In other words, when we have a strong internal reaction to what we witness, when we encounter Jesus, we should be moved to do something. We should be prompted to respond. Somebody said it like this, something on the inside. Holy Ghost on the inside, working on the outside. Oh, what a change in my life. But not just my life, because the woman at the well didn't stop there. She also acted on her responsibility to open up the possibility for others to encounter Jesus for themselves and have their own response. She left the well. Again, I use my sanctified imagination. I can see her leaving her water pot and running back to the town, excitedly exclaiming, "You gotta meet Jesus, the prophet, the Messiah." Somebody else said, "I said I wasn't gonna tell nobody, but I just couldn't keep it to myself." I told you I wouldn't be before you long. As I take my seat, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the question was not, Jesus, I believe that everything will be all right.